Calvary Church is dedicated to doctrine, and we want you to experience the life change that comes from knowing God's Word and applying it to your life. So we explain the Bible verse by verse, every chapter, every book. This is Expound.
Turn to 2 Samuel chapter 11 as we continue. 2 Samuel chapter 11. If you recall, last week we did 2 chapters, and I mentioned that there was a theme in those 2 chapters. You remember that theme? It was kindness. It was kindness. David wanted to be kind, and that word comes up a few different times. I want to show kindness to Mephibosheth, that's number 1. And then in the next chapter, he wanted to show kindness to a guy named Hanun, the son of Nahash, who was the next in line in the Ammonite kingdom to the east. That didn't turn out so well. So that was all about kindness. Beginning in chapter 11, things take a downward turn. The theme is no longer kindness. The theme is cunning, killing, cover up. And it's still the same guy. We're talking about David. Yes, King David. Yes, the man after God's own heart. Yep, that guy. The storm clouds sort of roll in chapter 11. And if you were to divide the book of 2 Samuel, as I've told you before, chapter 1 through 10 is about David's triumphs. David becomes king of Judah. He then takes Jerusalem, makes that the capital. Then he becomes king over all of Israel. Then he expands the borders of Israel. It's chapters 1 through 10, David's triumphs. But chapter 11 and 12 are David's transgressions. David, the man after God's own heart, sinning against the Lord flagrantly in a number of ways, one thing leading to another. And then, sadly, the rest of the book, chapters 13 through 24, are all about David's troubles. Really, because of David's transgression. So you're getting a sort of an honest blow-by-blow play of David, the man, myth, the legend. And you are seeing what happens in real time to even those chosen servants of the Lord when they follow their own design, when they fall into sin, and the trouble that follows in the family and in the kingdom of David. It is hard to believe we are dealing with the same individual. The shepherd boy, who is called a man after God's own heart. The warrior king, the sweet psalmist of Israel, the guy who gave us all those great psalms of praise and worship. Now we see him sinning, and you know this chapter and the next chapter probably very well, if you've been a believer for any length of time. As we get into this chapter, David is not a young man. We believe he's about 50 years old. Things have never been better. The nation has never been stronger. David's life and ministry, so to speak, have never been more solid, more well-rounded, more balanced than it is now. And that's when you need to watch. When you've lived a good, solid track record of a life, you experience God's goodness, and you have a tendency to let the guard down. And it happens quite a bit to quite a number of people. And again, I am so thankful for the Bible being so honest with the heroes like David. It's estimated that 2/3 of the heroes that are in the Bible that failed failed in the last 1/3 of their life. Not in the early days. They had something to go after. They had a goal. They had a purpose. They had an energy, a cadence. But it was as things sort of leveled out for them and they let their guard down. So David is a little bit older. He is in Jerusalem. He has built a palace. He is living in his palace, and he's living in the palace that he built for himself. And yet in the palace he built for himself, he is a prisoner of his own lust. I read an interesting story about the contractor who built, there's a prison in Manhattan in New York City. It used to be called Tombs Prison. It is now the city detention center, but it goes all the way back to the 1800s. The guy was a wealthy contractor. He built it, and then later on, he was found guilty of forgery, arrested and imprisoned in the facility he built. And when he was escorted to a cell and they were closing the door, he said, "I never imagined in planning this building that one day I would be an inmate in this building." David will be taken captive by the sin of adultery because of his own lust. Now again, he is a budding success. He is a success story. He takes the kingdom of Israel out to its zenith. It is between David and Solomon, Israel will never in its history, up till modern times, have the strength, the influence, and the real estate holdings that it had under King David and then later under King Solomon. So he is a budding success. But though he is a budding success, David has a blossoming weakness. And we did get a hint of that, if you remember. I'm just going to draw your attention to a text we already read in chapter 5, verse 13. After David became the king over all of Israel, as soon as he did, we are told in chapter 5, verse 13, and David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem. We mentioned that was a no-no. We mentioned it because God said through Moses to the people of Israel in Deuteronomy 17, when you ask for a king, make sure the king that you put on the throne does not multiply wives to himself. God's plan was one woman, one man for one lifetime, including kings. Don't multiply wives. That was common practice by the kings, the dynasties in antiquity, but God's people were to be different. Don't multiply wives. Here we see that he does that. David is growing his harem. Now you would think that in growing, that let's just be biological and physiological. You might imagine, well, if David's getting anything he wants and anyone he wants, any girl he wants to fulfill and enact his lust upon, certainly the more his harem grows, the more satisfied he will be. The exact opposite is the truth. The more you try to satiate or satisfy your desires, your lusts, the desires of your flesh, the stronger those desires become. They don't abate with satiation. You never get satisfied. You always want more, and David wants more and more, and now we're going to see that it bites him. I don't know if you've ever been to Niagara Falls, but it's an incredible sight. I just was able to see it briefly on a visit to New York years ago. But there was a man who was observing it in the early spring, late winter, early spring of the year. It was still quite cold. And he noticed that several of the birds like to get close to the waters as they're spraying up and get drinks from the splashing of the water over the falls. But because the temperature was so cold, he noticed that some of the birds, little droplets were freezing on the end of their wings. So they would come down, swoop down, get a drink of water, and flutter away, come back. Well, several birds were doing that, but because the ice was forming on the end of their wings, it weighed them down. So pretty soon they couldn't just flutter away and fly away. They plunged over the falls and were killed. Let's see David's plunge over the falls. Chapter 11, verse 1. It came to pass in the spring of the year, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. I love Jerusalem in the spring. It's usually when I have gone, traditionally, that's usually when I take a tour to Israel. For a few years, I did it in the winter, and I'm back now to doing it in early May. I love that time of the year. It's a beautiful time, and I'm sure David just thought, I know it's battle time. Now, it's an interesting statement, but it is battle time. It says, it's the spring of the year when the kings go out to battle. Now, it sounds weird to us, but there really was a time of the year when you go fight. Sort of like baseball season. This is war season. And battle season was after the winter. Now, in Israel, there are two rainy seasons, the early rain and the latter rain. The early rain is in the wintertime. The latter rain is late winter, early spring. But around May, the ground dries up. That's important because if you want to move chariots across land and not get the wheels stuck in the mud, you wait till May. You wait till spring. So if you're going to fight, you don't do it in July. It's awfully hot. It's miserable when you put armor on or try to assault a city. So spring's a good time to go assault cities, take over nations. It's good fighting weather. So it's time to fight, and there is a battle that is unfinished from the previous chapter. David was an early part of that battle. He goes back home to Jerusalem. He waits it out. The winter season is over. It's now time to get back into the battle. But notice that David sends his commander-in-chief, Joab, to fight the battle. But David stayed at Jerusalem. Now, I mentioned just a moment ago that when you are at a place where things are just flowing smoothly and there's God's blessing, that beware, because the enemy seeks to come in and take advantage of that. Also, beware of idleness. Now, I'm risking sounding like your grandmother when I say that, because in the old days, our parents and grandparents used to warn us kids about idleness, about being lazy, sitting around, too much time on your hands. But now I have discovered it's true. When it comes to spiritual attacks, I find that it's not when I'm busy, it's when I'm bored that I'm more vulnerable and the attacks come. Time on the hands. David is thinking, look, I'm 50 years old. This is a young man's game. I don't have the fight in me anymore. I'm king after all. Leave that to the young kids. I don't need to go out and serve on the battlefield. Now take a lesson from that, especially us, older people. Sometimes we think, well, I've paid my dues. I used to serve and be very active when I was younger and get involved in the church and get involved in ministry and do all those things that they talk about. But I've done it. It's over. I don't have the energy. Let the younger generation take it. Good. Pray for revival in the younger generation, but the younger generation needs to hear from you, from us. And I'm praying for a revival among the older generation because I'm one of them. And I see the tendency to just sort of cool your heels, relax a little bit, Hang out a little bit more. After all, you've worked hard. You deserve it. Hey, look at it this way. You have less of your life to live. Make sure that you live it for the glory of God. You have a few years left to live. I have a few years left to live. I want to make sure that they're lived right and that we finish well. And that when we see a battle, we go, oh, send the kids out. Let's go, man. Let's fight it. But he remained in Jerusalem. Then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. A lot of you have read this passage and it didn't make sense, but if you take a tour to Israel, it suddenly makes perfect sense. When you go to the city of David and you see that it is built on a hill, and the king, if the city is built on a hill, where is the king going to build his house? Top of the hill. He's king of the hill. They all did that. David too. He built his palace on the top of the hill. You can stand, as we've showed you, in the remains of the very palace King David built. And as you're standing there and you look down, you can see the houses terraced in front of you, both on the other side of the valley, but immediately in front of you. So you're looking down at the roof or into the windows of the houses below you, because you have the vantage point on the hill. Now, David is on his roof. Gardens were placed on roofs in those days. It was very common to hang out, especially in warmer times of the year, hang outside. And if it's a beautiful spring evening, outside is where you want to be in Jerusalem. He goes outside, and you notice two words in that verse. It says he saw a woman, but then notice this. She was very beautiful to behold. Two different words. One is a glance. Can't help that. The second is a gaze. You can't help that. He couldn't help if somebody's out there bathing, or if he glanced and saw through a window, however the case was. That first look, he couldn't help it. It's what we are all confronted with on a daily basis in the world in which we live. But what you decide, what I decide to do with what we see, and if we continue to behold what we see, then it becomes the issue. So David glanced, but now David is gazing. David sent and inquired about the woman. Job did say something very precious. If you haven't found it in that book, he said, I have made a covenant with my eyes. Why then should I look upon a young maiden or a young woman? And I like that idea that we make a covenant with our eyes. Eyes, now it's Skip talking. Eyes, listen up here. You can't help what you see, but you can sure help what you behold. So here's the deal. Let's make a covenant. The idea is that you maintain control. Like Paul said, I bring my body under subjection. So David failed to do that. Now let me just throw this in, because I don't know the scenario. You might infer that she was out there on the rooftop bathing. That would be a problem if she did that. Or that she was doing it in her windows, but the blind wasn't closed, or the shade wasn't closed, the curtain. That would also be a problem. I don't know. I don't know if she was doing this to taunt him, or if she is completely innocent or complicit in any way. It's hard to tell. But I will say this. It would be much easier to fight temptation if women, and I'm not blaming any women or saying it's not the man's fault. In this case, David had the power. It was abuse. But I'm just going to say, women, help us guys out in how you dress, in how you present yourself, in what you show, in what you reveal. Please, be modest. And if you think, well, this is going to get those guys going, What would your mom say? What would your dad say? Give him a call and ask him, hey, Dad, FaceTime me. What do you think? Oh, you're not wearing that to church. Good man. But he saw a woman bathing, and she was beautiful to behold. So David sent and inquired about the woman. I want to know who she is. And someone said, is this not Bathsheba? What makes sense, the girl taking a bath is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. I see in that verse a warning for David. Who's that girl? Well, that girl happens to have a husband. And that girl happens to have a father. So when you young men or older men look or entertain a woman or have an mental escapade, understand you are looking at somebody's daughter. You're dealing with somebody's wife or future wife. And that is a good perspective. And I see this as a warning for David. I do believe God warns us before we fall into sin. Who's this girl, man? She's awesome. Well, she's the daughter of Eliam. Now, Eliam, we discover, is the father of a counselor of David named Ahithophel. Just put that in your head. Ahithophel. Ahithophel's dad, Ahithophel works for David, is a counselor. Ahithophel's dad, Ahithophel is the father of Eliam, right? So you have Bathsheba, Eliam, Ahithophel. So it would be Bathsheba's grandfather is Ahithophel, who works for David. Now, I'm going to say, put that in your head, because later on you're going to see Ahithophel turn on David. And if you've ever wondered, how could a trusted counselor turn on David? Perhaps we have the answer right here. What was going on with the king and his granddaughter? Isn't that the wife of Uriah the Hittite? Then David sent messengers and took her. And she came to him, and he lay with her, for she was cleansed from her impurity, and she returned to her house. Now let me get really honest. Do you think David had fun that night? Be honest. Do you think do you think it was pleasurable for David? Of course it was. It was pleasurable, it was exciting, it was exhilarating, it made him feel young again, all that stuff the guys say. But it didn't last. It was so short-lived, and we're going to find out sin is so expensive. What it is going to cost David, David's family, David's children, David's friends, the kingdom, soldiers on the battlefield, their families who will mourn their loss, not just one, but several. All because it felt so good. It's so right. Nobody ever looked at me like she did and talked to me like she did and gave me value like she did. All that nonsense. It's fleeting. I love in Hebrews when it describes Moses, he said he chose rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, or the pleasure of sin for a season, as the King James puts it. In other words, sin is fun, but it lasts just for a passing moment. Then it's over. So, he had a wonderful, exciting time. The rest of the chapter and the rest of the book will be the fallout from this. Now, question. We already know David had many wives and concubines, right? He has a whole group of women in his harem. And God said, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to bless your children. I'm going to give you stuff. David is enjoying a wonderful life. He's king of the world. His house is on the top of the hill. He has plenty of women, more than he should have. He lives in opulence. But, this is how David sees it, there's one thing I don't have, and that's her. The one thing I want, he is thinking, is the one thing that is forbidden for me to have. Remember how God said to Adam, Adam, you can have all these trees in the garden. They're all yours. Look, I made them all for you. There's just one tree you can't touch. Well, that's the one I want. We can all relate. And the woman conceived, verse 5. And so she sent and told David and said, I'm pregnant. I'm with child. Then David sent to Joab, saying, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. Who's Uriah? He's a Hittite. A Hittite was a Canaanite. A Canaanite was a person who occupied the land of Israel before the Israelites came in. Remember the Jebusites inhabited Jerusalem? These were tribes of Canaanites. A Hittite was one of those Canaanite tribes. But he seems to have been a converted Hittite, a converted Canaanite, one who believed in Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews. And you're going to see this. Just keep this in mind. You have a man who has come under the protection of King David in Israel. He is not an Israelite by birth, but he has come to believe in Yahweh because he is very concerned about keeping the law and the Ark of the Covenant. We'll read that in the story. Something else you need to know about Uriah the Hittite. By the time we get to chapter 23 of 2 Samuel, there's a list of David's elite fighting men, his mighty men, the elite fighting forces of David. And among the elite forces of King David is listed Uriah the Hittite. Very, very important soldier to him. But he's made a mistake. He's taken his wife. Now she's pregnant. Now comes the cover-up. Then David sent to Joab and said, bring me Uriah the Hittite. So Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah had come to him, David asked how Joab was doing. Now he had just sent a note to Joab. He could have asked Joab, how you doing, Joab? But you can see what he's doing here. It's all a cover-up. It's all to make it look like she is pregnant by Uriah, as we will see. So David asked how Joab was doing, how the people were doing, how the war prospered. And David said to Uriah, go down to your house, wash your feet. So Uriah departed from the king's house, and a gift of food from the king followed him. Royal treatment, filet mignon for all my friends. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house. That's where the guards sleep, the guardhouse, with all the servants of his Lord, and did not go down to his house. So when they told David, saying, Uriah didn't go down to his house, David said to Uriah, did you not come from a journey? Why did you not go down to your house? And Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah are dwelling in tents. And my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are encamped in the open fields. They're up there in Rabbah, in Ammonite territory. They're fighting a battle. Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink and to lie with my wife? As you live and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. Then David said to Uriah, wait here today also, and tomorrow I will let you depart. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day and the next. And when David called him, he ate and drank before him, and he made him drunk. That is, David made Uriah, just kept pouring his glass, and made him drunk. And at evening he went out to lie on his bed with the servants of his Lord, but he did not go to his house. You see what David is doing. Make him so stoned that he's going to stumble home, not really remember the night. Then we can say, oh yeah, he slept with his wife that night and she got pregnant and they had this kid. But a drunk Uriah is better than a sober David in this case. He still has his wits about him and does not feel that he could go home and celebrate. He's concerned about the ark of God, which is intense. Also, there was sort of a ongoing stipulation for soldiers in Israel. We see it all the way back with David in 1 Samuel, that when you're out to battle, that during wartime, you don't have conjugal visits with your wife. You don't engage in that. You keep your mind and your head and your heart in the battle. So he is living by that code. So he gets him drunk, but he's still sleeping outside. Then in the morning, it was so that David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. So you'll see that he's sending Uriah's death warrant, giving it to Uriah. It's sealed, so Uriah can't read it. And he wrote in the letter saying, set Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle and retreat from him that he may be struck down and die. Now we're learning a lesson here. It was awfully exciting when David looked out that window and saw that beautiful girl bathing. And then he thought, I'm the king, I can do what I want. But as we have seen now, especially, one sin leads to another. Lust led to adultery, led to deception, led to entrapment, and now leads to murder. It's very, very expensive. And unchecked, it's not just one sinful act. You have to keep up the charade and broaden your base of sinful activity. So it happened, while Joab besieged the city, that he assigned Uriah to a place where he knew there were valiant men. Then the men of the city came out and fought with Joab, and some of the people of the servants of David fell, and Uriah the Hittite died also. Then Joab sent and told David the things concerning the war, and charged the messenger, saying, when you have finished telling the matters of the war to the king, if it happens that the king's wrath rises, and he says to you, why did you approach so near to the city when you fought? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who struck Abimelech, the son of Jerubbesheth? Was it not a woman who cast a piece of millstone on him from the wall so that he died in Thebez? Why did you go near the wall? Now that's a reference to an event that happened way back in the book of Judges, I think around chapter 9. And it was a battle where Israel got too close to the wall. A woman threw a stone down, killed some soldiers. And so he is referencing that, shows you that they knew their history, that things were being written down already, so they had access to the documents of what became the book of Judges. It's a reference to something that happened in their history. Why did you go near the wall? Then you shall say, if the king flies off the handle, gets all torqued because of this, because you're losing the battle, just say this to the king: your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So the messenger came and told David all that Joab sent by him. And the messenger said to David, surely the men prevailed against us and came out to us in the field. Then we drove them back as far as the entrance of the gate. Now that's just not a good war strategy. If you are moving your opponent back to their city, fine, but you don't take them all the way to the gate because, well, there's walls right there. And there's people on the walls, and they have arrows and spears and hot oil and rocks. But they drove them all the way to the entrance of the gate. And I can see David just, fuming, getting so angry, like, oh man, you guys are just so lame. The archers shot from the wall, verse 24, at your servants, and some of the king's servants are dead. And your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. Then David said to the messenger, do not let this thing displease you, for the sword devours one as well as another. In other words, well, you win some, you lose some. Strengthen your attack against the city and overthrow it, and so encourage him. Rather than getting angry, rather than feeling remorse, David feels relief. He's going, wow, I dodged a bullet. Wow, I'm getting away with it. He's dead. Verse 26, when the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband. And when her mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. Last part of that verse. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Let me suggest to you in the chapter we just read that there are seasons. Let's look at it in seasons of the year. It was springtime in David's city. It was summertime in David's thought life. Sizzling hot when he saw that girl. So it was springtime in David's city. It was summertime in David's mind, his thought life. It was then fall time in David's character. And now it's winter time in David's soul. What David has done, he thinks he gets away with it, but he is feeling isolated. He is not experiencing the joy of the Lord. I'll prove that to you in a moment. He feels alienated from God. His strength is gone. The thing that he did displeased the Lord. He probably thought, I got away with it, and the people are going to think I'm a hero because I took the dead guy's wife and I brought her to my house to become my wife, showing the people of Israel that I take care of my soldiers. Proverbs 5:21 says, the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his goings. Moses killed an Egyptian. It says he looked this way and that way, and then he killed the Egyptians. Yes, he looked this way. Yes, he looked that way. He failed to look that way. The ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his goings. David, you think you got away with it. You think you covered it up. The Lord knows, and the Lord is displeased. And I mentioned sin is expensive. It cost David, it cost David's family, it will cost David's sons, that is his family, but specifically his sons. It cost Bathsheba, her husband. Uriah died. Other soldiers died. All those families of all those soldiers are mourning their loss. All because David had a wonderful time that night. The thing David had done has displeased the Lord. Then the Lord sent Nathan to David, and he came to him and he said to him, there were two men in one city, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had exceedingly many flocks and herds. He was very wealthy. But the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb, just a little female lamb, tender, a yearling probably, which he had brought and nourished, and it grew up together with him and with his children. It ate of his own food and drank from his own cup. You that have dogs and are very familiar with your pets and love your pets, you probably do the same thing. It was like a daughter to him. And a traveler came to the rich man, who refused to take from his own flock and from his own herd to prepare one for the wayfaring man who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. Now, we're reading from one chapter into the next chapter. What you don't get is this. A year elapsed between the previous chapter and this chapter. Almost 1 year. Most scholars, in putting a timeline to these chapters, would say it was about 11 months, almost a year, that David, nothing happens. He thinks he's gotten away with it. Until now. Nathan the prophet comes in, gives a parable. The parable explains that the rich man took the poor man's lamb, even though he had many animals. But he took that one man's little pet lamb, that little joy of the household, and prepared it for the man who had come to him. Killed it, ate it. Nothing like fresh lamb. Then David's anger was greatly aroused at the man, and he said to Nathan, "As the Lord lives, the man who has done this shall surely die." Just stop right here. David grew up as a shepherd. Nathan was wise in the way he approached David. He was waiting for the right time, waiting for the right circumstances, and he chose the right story. He is approaching David based on what he knew that David had: compassion as a shepherd for a flock, especially helpless lambs. He knew that of all of the stories he could bring, this one would touch David's heart the most, because this was his background. So he is appealing to David's compassion as a shepherd. And David says, here's the verdict. This man, the man who has done this thing, kill him. Wait a minute, David. Kill him? Do you know your Old Testament, David? I'm sure you do. Do you remember what the law says, the Torah says, David? Of course you do. You're the king. You know this stuff. You can quote the book of Judges. Surely you know that the punishment for what Nathan just described is that the man be paid back fourfold. That's it. You just pay him back 4 times what you took or killed. If you kill his animal, you give him 4 little lammies back. But David goes for the nuclear option, goes ballistic. Kill him. Take his life. Now, when he said that, he just sentenced himself. Here's what's going on. We are blind to our own sin. But when we see our sin on somebody else, it looks so horrible. That guy should die for what he has done. Well, actually, he shouldn't die. You should just pay back the guy 4 times. But you should die because in the law, adultery and murder are punishable by death. So, that sets up what he says to him next. Nathan said to David, verse 7, "You are the man. That man shall die." Well, actually, you're the man. You're the one who's done it. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel. I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house, your master's wives, could be translated your master's women, into your keeping, gave you the house of Israel and Judah. And if that had been too little, I also would have given you much more. Why have you despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? You have killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword. You have taken his wife to be your wife. You have killed him with the sword of the people of Ammon. Yes, the enemy killed him, but it's like you ran the sword through him yourself. Now, therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up adversity from you, against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes, give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of all the sun. On that day, when Nathan came in and told him the story and then pointed his prophet finger at him and said, you are the man, I would love to have seen David's face. Because I think he was so shocked, he was so surprised, he's immediately thinking, how on earth could Nathan know all this? Okay, back to what we read or what I quoted in Proverbs 5. The ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all of his goings. David's sin was right before God. It was in plain sight. Hebrews says all things are naked and open before the eyes of the one with whom we must give an account. But how does this man know? God snitched. God told his man. God told the prophet. This is what David did. And he was looking for the right time, the right story, the right occasion, the right approach. Somebody once said, secret sin on earth is open scandal in heaven. It's a good thing to remember. You may want to jot that one down. Secret sin on earth is open scandal in heaven. Nothing surprises God. God sees it all. But you will notice in verse 10, he says, the sword will never depart from your house because you have despised me and taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. You're going to see this unfold in the story. David will have 3 sons who will be murdered. Amnon will rape one of David's daughters, one of his own stepsisters, Tamar. Absalom will then murder Amnon, but then Absalom will start a rebellion against his father David, and in the battle to bring Absalom back, Joab, the commander-in-chief of David's army, will kill Absalom. And then later on, when Solomon is newly inaugurated as king, Adonijah, another of David's son, will be killed by Solomon. So the prophecy here will be fulfilled, that the sword will not depart from your house. He also says, I'm going to raise up an adversary against you from your own house. That's going to be his own son, Absalom. He's going to take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this son. And that's going to happen as we read. I won't give it away, but that's what Ahithophel, the guy who will feel very stiffed because of this, is going to counsel that Absalom do in the sight of all of Israel, this very thing. Verse 12, for you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all of Israel, before the sun. Then David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. It's taken a year to get this confession. For a year almost, David didn't go to God, so God went to David through Nathan the prophet. Now he confesses, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said to David, "The Lord has also put away your sin, and you shall not die." Remember, David said, "The man who has done this thing shall die." You're the man. "Oh, I've sinned." You're not going to die. How gracious God is. Forgiveness is just a confession away. I've sinned. Admit it. I've sinned. Some people go, "Well, if I've sinned, why even bother saying that? If I've sinned." Unless you're convinced of it. And if you're convinced of it, don't say, "If I've blown it, if I've sinned." Just say, "I've blown it. I've sinned." You are a confession away from forgiveness. He confessed his sin. The Lord has put away your sin. You shall not die. However, and the however is pretty important, because by this deed you have given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also who is born to you shall surely die. And then Nathan departed to his house. Yes, there is cleansing for sin. But, or as it says here, however, there are consequences. Don't think that forgiveness means the absence of consequences. If you had a bad day and then you went out and got drunk, God forbid that you would do that. But in your drunken stupor, you went outside and played in the street and didn't see a car, and the car ran you over and you broke several bones, you can be forgiven. Confession, "Lord, I'm sorry." Forgiven. You're still going to suffer consequences. You're still going to walk with a limp. You might have lifetime consequences. If you are loose and sleep around and then you repent, God will forgive you, but you might have a sexually transmitted disease that will affect you and people around you for generations. There are consequences even though there is forgiveness. Forgiveness is granted. That's instantaneous. Consequences are not always removed immediately. Now, the eternal consequence is always removed, but in David's case, several consequences will be meted out. And then it says, Nathan departed to his house. And the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bore to David. It became very ill. David therefore pleaded with God for the child, and David fasted, went in and lay all night on the ground. So the elders of the house arose and went to him to raise him up from the ground, but he would not, nor did he eat food with them. Then on the seventh day it came to pass the child died. And the servants of David were afraid to tell him that the child was dead. For they said, "Indeed, while the child was still alive, we spoke to him, and he would not heed our voice. How can we tell him that the child is dead? He may do some harm." When David saw that his servants were whispering, David perceived that the child was dead. David therefore said to his servants, "Is the child dead?" And they said, "He's dead." So David arose from the ground, washed, and anointed himself, changed his clothes, went into the house of the Lord and worshiped. And he went to his own house. And when he requested, they set food before him, and he ate. Then his servants said to him, "What is this thing that you have done? You fasted and wept for the child while he was alive, but when the child died, you arose and ate food." So he said, "While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept. For I said, who can tell whether the Lord will be gracious to me that the child may live? But now he's dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him. He shall not return to me." Then David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, and went into her and lay with her. And so this is some time that has elapsed, obviously. So she bore him a son. They called his name Solomon, and the Lord loved him. Now, I don't have time to dig it out now, but way before Solomon was born, and God gave a promise about the covenant that we read in chapter 7. If you look at the parallel passage in Chronicles, it's predicted you're going to have a son. You're going to name him Solomon. That's how David knew Solomon would be the next in line for the throne, because the promise of the covenant of the sonship to continue the dynasty of David was already told him well in advance. So he had a son, named him Solomon. The Lord loved him. I love that. The Lord loved him. And he sent word by the hand of Nathan the prophet, so he called his name Jedediah because of the Lord. Now Joab fought against Rabbah, the people of Ammon, and took the royal city. That's the capital. Again, Rabbah is modern-day Amman, Jordan. And Joab sent messengers to David and said, I have fought against Rabbah. I have taken the city's water supply. Interesting, David's method of capturing Jerusalem was to take the water supply of Jerusalem by Joab. Evidently, Joab saw that worked, so let's try it again, and it worked. Now, therefore, gather the rest of the people together and camp against the city and take it, lest I take the city and it be called after my name. So David gathered all the people together and went to Rabbah and fought against it and took it. May I suggest David should have done that in the beginning. See, David now goes to battle. David should have gone to battle at the beginning of chapter 11, but he stayed back and Joab went to battle. Now Joab says, you want me to take the city? I'm going to name it Joabville, unless you come and finish the task as a king ought to do. And then he took the king's crown, verse 30, from his head. Its weight was a talent of gold. A talent is 75 pounds. Now, I don't believe he wore that crown. You put a 75-pound anything on your head, you're going to have issues. It was probably a ceremonial crown only, as was the case in antiquity. They would have grandiose crowns that were there for display and for ceremonial sake, but it wasn't worn. Listen, the kings and queens of England, their crown, like little Queen Elizabeth, it's like 3, maybe up to 5 pounds. That's about it. So 75 pounds, he's not wearing it. And it was set on David's head. Now, I'm sure David said, come on, put that thing on. I want to try it on. So you can't wear it for very long, but he did momentarily. He also brought out the spoil of the city in great abundance. He brought out the people who were in it, put them to work with saws and iron picks, with iron axes, made them cross over to the bricks works. So he did with all the cities of the people of Ammon. David and all the people returned to Jerusalem. So we did it. We covered David's transgressions in one setting. I wanted to be able to do that. Next, and for the rest of the book, it's David's troubles. And again, I am so glad that the Bible is honest to give me the full scoop. Okay, so this is what happens. Even if you're a man after God's own heart, this is the fallout in disobeying God. So we have lots of good stuff. I'm glad you came tonight. I hope and pray you'll come again next time as we continue the story. I always tell you this, but Wednesday nighters, you are my people. You are my tribe. This is the group that is not afraid to plow deep and long. And I thank God for you. Father, we do thank you for your word. Thank you that we have an opportunity in this country to unashamedly meet and to worship. And our worship has been in singing to you, and our worship has been in hearing you speak to us. And oh, you have spoken to us through the life of David, through the good and the bad, through his episodes of kindness with Mephibosheth and Hunan, and his episodes of cunning and killing and cover-up in the chapters we have read tonight. Father, I pray that you would convince us that sin is expensive and our ways are before your eyes. And that we will live to please you, to honor you in our thought life, in our relational life, in our lives with children and with wives and with husbands, and with employees and with people we work around and family members. I pray, Lord, that they will be attracted to you because of us. And rather than David, who gave an occasion for the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, we know that your enemies are looking for smack. They're looking for stuff on the church. And every time a leader falls, every time something bad happens, they relish it and they promote it and they retweet it. But Lord, I pray that by our lives, we would bring you a good reputation, a good flavor, a good savor, and attract men and women to you by our lives. For we ask it in Jesus' name, and God's people said, amen.
For more resources from Calvary Church and Skip Heitzig, visit calvarynm.church. Thank you for joining us from this teaching in our series, Expound.